Hi, book club. So we are on chapter 5 now of A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. This is the story of the author um, going on the Appalachian Trail hike all the way from Georgia up to Maine. He's going with one of his friends, a friend who he's not super close with. He hadn't seen for about 25 years. But they're going on this hike together. They are slightly unprepared. And they had, in the previous chapter, they had just run in to another hiker who they've been hiking with for about 2 or 3 days now. And she is super, super annoying. Yeah, so let's get to it. So, what's your star sign? Asked Mary Ellen. Um, Cunilingus? Katz answered and looked profoundly unhappy. She looked at him. I don't know that one, she said, and made a I'll be darned frown. And then she added, I thought I knew all them. Mine is a Libra. What's yours? She said, turning to me. Oh, I don't know. I tried to think of something, and I said, necrophilia? Oh, I don't know that one either, she said. Say, are you guys putting me on? Yeah, I responded. It was 2 nights later, and we were camped at a lofty spot called Indian Grove Gap, between two brooding summits, the one tiring to recollect and the other dispiriting to behold. We had hiked 22 miles in 2 days, a highly respectable distance for us, but distinct listlessness, ooh, I don't like saying that, and sense of anticlimax, a kind of mid-mountain lassitude, had set in. We had spent our days doing precisely what we had done on previous days and would continue for the future days. Over the same sort of hills, along the same wandering track, through the same endless woods. The trees were so thick that we hardly ever got good views. And when we did get views, it was of infinite hills covered in more trees. I was discouraged to note that I was grubby again, already, and barking for white bread. And then, of course, there was a constant prattling, awesomely brainless presence of Mary Ellen. When's your birthday? She said to me. December 8th, I replied. Oh, that's Virgo. That's your star sign. No, actually, it's Sagittarius, I replied dryly. Whatever, she said abruptly. Geez, you guys stink. Oh, well, yeah, we've been walking for days now with no shower, I replied. And then Mary Ellen said, Me? I don't sweat. I never have. I don't dream either. Everybody dreams, Kat said. Well, I don't, Mary Ellen replied. Except people of extremely low intelligence. It's a scientific fact, Katz added. Mary Ellen regarded him expressionlessly for a moment and then said abruptly to neither of us in particular, Do you ever have a dream where you're like at school and you look down and you haven't got any clothes on? She shuddered. I hate that one. I thought you said you didn't dream, Kat said. She stared at him for a very long moment, as if trying to remember where she had encountered him before. And falling, she went on. I hate that one too. Like when you fall into a hole and you just fall and fall and fall and fall and fall. She gave a brief shiver and then noisily unblocked her ears. Katz watched her in idle interest. I know a guy who did that once, he said, and one of his eyes popped out. Oh, because what she's doing is like, and blowing really hard to try to pop her ears. That's what she's doing when she clears out her ears. I know a guy who did that once, and one of his eyes popped out, Katz told her. She looked at him doubtfully. It rolled right across the living room floor, and the dog ate it. Isn't that right, Bryson? Katz said as he turned to me. I nodded. "You're making that up," she said. "I'm not." It rolled right across the floor, and before anyone could say anything, the dog ate it up in one bite. I confirmed it for her with another nod. She considered this one for a minute and said, "So what did your friends do about the eye hole? Did he have to get a glass eye or something?" "Well, he wanted to, but his family was kind of poor. So what he did was he got a ping pong ball and painted an eye onto it, and he used that." "Ugh," said Mary softly. "So I wouldn't go blowing out your ear holes anymore." She considered again and said, "Yeah, maybe you're right," she said at length, and then blew out her ear holes. In a few private moments, when Mary Ellen went off to tinkle in the distant shrubs, Katz and I formed a secret pact that we would hike 14 miles into Morrow to a place called Dick's Creek Gap, where there's a highway to a town of Hiawassee. It was 11 miles to the north. We would hike to the gap if it killed us, and then we would hitchhike to Hiawassee for dinner and a night in a motel. Plan B was that we would kill Mary Ellen and take her Pop-Tarts. So the next day we hiked. We really hiked, startling Mary Ellen with our thrusting strides. There was a motel in Hiawassee, clean sheets, a shower, and color TV, and a reputed choice of restaurants. We needed no more incentive than that to perk up our step. Cats flagged in the first hour. I felt tired too by noon, but we pushed on determined. Mary Ellen fell further and further off of our pace until she was even behind Katz. It was kind of a miracle in the hills. At 4 o'clock, tired and overheated, and streaked about our faces was gritty sweat. I stepped from the woods onto a broad shoulder of US Highway 76, on an asphalt river through the woods, pleased to note that the road was wide and reasonably important looking. Half a mile down the road, there was a clearing in the trees and a drive, a hint of civilization, before the road curved away again. Several cars passed as I stood there. Katz tumbled out from the woods a few minutes later, looking wild of hair and eye, and I hustled him across the road against his voluble protests, and he needed to sit down immediately. I wanted to try to get a lift before Mary Ellen came along and screwed everything up. I couldn't think of how she might, but I knew that she would. "Have you seen her?" I asked anxiously. "Miles back, sitting on a rock with her boots off, rubbing her feet. She looked really tired," Katz said. "Good," I replied. Katz sagged onto his pack, grubby and spent, and I stood beside him on the shoulder with my thumb out, trying to protect an image of wholesomeness and respectability, making private irked tutting noises at every car and pickup that passed. I had not hitchhiked in about 25 years, and it was a vaguely humbling experience. Cars shot past very fast. Unbelievably fast, actually. A few approached more slowly, always occupied by elderly people. Little white heads just above the window line, who stared out at us without sympathy or expression, as they would have at a field of cows. It seemed unlikely that anyone was going to stop for us. I wouldn't have stopped for us. "We're never going to get picked up," Katz announced despondently after cars had forsaken us for about 15 minutes. He was right, of course, but it always exasperated me how easily he can give up on things. "Can you try to be a little more positive?" I said. "Okay," he replied. "I'm positive we're never going to get picked up. Look at us." He smelled his armpits with disgust and said, "Jesus, I smell like Jeffrey Dahmer's refrigerator. Ooh, that's a dark joke. There is a phenomenon called trail magic, known and spoken of with reverence by everyone who hiked the trail, which holds that often when things look darkest, some little piece of serendipity comes along to put you back into that heavenly plane. Ours was a baby blue Pontiac Trans Am, which flew past us and then screeched to a stop on the shoulder 100 yards or so down the road, in a cloud of gravelly dust. It was so far behind where we stood that we didn't think it could possibly be for us. But then it jerked itself into reverse and came at us, half on the shoulder and half off, moving very fast and a little wild. I stood transfixed. The day before, we had been told by a pair of seasoned hikers that sometimes in the south, drivers will swerve at Appalachian trail hikers or run over their packs for a purpose of hilarity. And I supposed that this might be one of those moments. I was about to fly for cover, and even Katz was halfway to his feet, when it stopped just right before us. With a rock and another cloud of dust, a young, youthful female's head popped out of the passenger side window and said, "Woo, boys, want a rod?" she called. Oh, she has a southern accent. Okay. I was like, what are these words? "You boys want a rud?" she called. "Yes, ma'am, we sure do," we said, putting on our best behavior. We hastened to the car and with our packs and bowed down at the window to find a very handsome, very, very, very drunk young couple. Oh no. Sorry. My iPad fell. Sorry. Okay, let me get back to where I was. Sorry, I lost my page. AT shelter, a few hundred. No, they were knee deep in snow. Okay, that's not it.
Have a piece of pizza, Amy?
Yeah, of course. Okay, here we go. Okay, we hastened to the car with our packs and bowed down to the window to find a very handsome, very happy, very drunk young couple who didn't look to be more than 8 or 19 years old. The woman was carefully topping with 2 plastic cups from 3/4 empty bottle of wild turkey. "Hi," she said, "hop on in." We hesitated. The car was packed nearly solid with stuff suitcases, boxes, assorted black bags, harder loads of clothing, and it was a small car to begin with, but there was barely any room for them. Kitty, don't. Get away. "Darren, why don't you make some room for these gentlemen?" the young woman ordered, and then added for us, "This here is Darren." Darren got out, grinned a hello, opened the trunk, and stared blankly at it, while the precipitation slowly spread through his brain that was so packed solid. He was so drunk that I thought for a moment that he might fall off of his feet. But then he snapped to and found some rope and quite definitely tied our bags to the rooftop. Then, ignoring the vigorous advice and instructions of his partner, he tossed stuff around in the back until he somehow created a small cavity to which Katz and I could climb in. Her name was Donna, and they were on their way to some desperate-sounding community, Turkey Balls Falls, or someplace like that. It was another 50 miles up the road, but they were pleased to drop us off in Hiawassee, if they didn't kill us all first. Darren drove at 127 miles an hour with one finger on the wheel, his head bouncing to the rhythm of some internal song, while Donna twirled in her seat to talk to us. She was stunningly pretty, Y'all have to excuse us, we're celebrating, she said, and she held up her plastic cup as if to toast. What are you celebrating? Katz asked. We're getting married tomorrow, she announced proudly. No kidding, Katz said. Congratulations. Yep, Darren, it's really hard. They wrote the accent and it's hard to read. Yep, Darren here is gonna make an honest woman out of me. She tousled his hair, then impulsively lunged over and gave the side of his head a kiss, which became lingering, and then probing, and then frankly looking invasive, and concluded as a kind of bonus by shooting her hand into a surprising place. Or at least so we surmise, because Darren abruptly banged his head on the ceiling, and it took us a brief but exciting detour into the lane of oncoming traffic. And then she turned to us with a dreamy, unabashed leer, as if to say, who's next? It looked, we reflected later, as if Darren might have his hands full, though. We additionally concluded that it would probably be worth it. Here, have a drink, she offered suddenly, seizing the bottle around the neck and looking for spare cups on the floor. Ah, no thanks, Katz said, but he looked really tempted. Go on, she encouraged. Katz held up his palm and said, I'm reformed. Yar? Well, good for you. Then have a drink. She added. No, really. All right, well, how about you? She said, turning to me. No thanks. I couldn't have freed my pinned arms even if I wanted to drink. They were dangled before me like a Tyrannosaurus's limbs. You're not reformed, are ya? She asked me. Well, kinda, I decided, for purposes of solidarity, to forswear alcohol for the duration. She looked at us and said, You guys like Mormons or something? No, we're just hikers, I replied. She nodded thoughtfully, satisfied with that, and had another drink. And then she made Darren jump again. They dropped us at the Moles Motel in Hiawassee, an old-fashioned, nondescript, plainly non-chain establishment on a bend in the road near the corner of town. We thanked them profusely and then went through a little song and dance as if trying to give them gas money, which they thoughtfully refused, and we watched as Darren returned to the busy road as if fired from a rocket launcher. I believe I saw him bang his head again as they disappeared into the over a small rise. And then we were alone with our packs in an empty motel. An empty motel parking lot in a dusty, forgotten, queer-looking little town in northern Georgia. The word that clings to every hiker's thoughts in North Georgia is Deliverance, the 1970 novel by James Dickey that was made into a Hollywood movie. It concerns, as you may recall, 4 middle-aged men from Atlanta who go on a weekend canoeing trip down a fictional river and find themselves severely out of their element. Every family I ever met up here has at least one relative in the penitentiary, a character from the book once remarked. Some of them are in for making liquor or running it, but most of them are in for murder. They don't think a whole lot about killing people up here, is another quote from the book. And so, of course, it proves, as our urban foursome find themselves variously buggered, murdered, and haunted by abrasive, demented backwoodsmen. Early in the book, Dickey has his characters stop for directions in some sleepy and hookwormy and ugly town, which for all I knew could have been Hiawassee. What is certainly true is that the book was set in this part of the state, and the movie was filmed in the area. The famous banjo-plucking albino who played dueling banjos in the movie still apparently lives in Clayton, just down the road. Dickey's book, as you might expect, attracted heated criticism in the state when it was published. One observer called it the most demeaning characterization of Southern Highlanders in modern literature, which, if anything, was an understatement. But in fact, it must be said that the people have been appalled by northern Georgia for more than 150 years. One 19th chronicler described the region's inhabitants as tall, thin, cadaverous-looking animals, as melancholy and lazy as boiled codfish, and others freely employed words like depraved, rude, uncivilized, and backward to describe the reclusive, underbred folk of Georgia's deep, dark woods and desperate township. Dickey, who was himself a Georgian and knew the area well, swore that this book was a faithful description. Perhaps it was the lingering influence of the book, and perhaps simply the time of day, or maybe nothing more than the fact that we were in the town, but Hiawassee did feel palpably weird and unsettling. The kind of place where it wouldn't altogether surprise you if you find your gasoline being pumped by a cyclops. We went into the motel reception area, which was more like a small, untidy living room than a place of business. And we found an aged woman with lively white hair and a bright cotton dress sitting on a sofa by the door, and she looked rather happy to see us. "Hi," I said. "We're looking for a room." The woman grinned and she nodded. "Actually, 2 rooms if you've got 'em." The woman grinned and nodded again. I waited for her to get up, but she didn't move. "That's my cat. She's annoying." But she didn't move. "For tonight," I said encouragingly. "Do you have rooms?" Her grin became a kind of a beam, and she grasped my hand and held on tight. Her fingers felt cold and bony. She just looked at me intently and eagerly, as if she thought, or hoped, that I would throw a stick for her to fetch. "Tell her we come from Reality Land," Katz whispered in my ear. At that moment, the door swung open, and a gray-haired woman swept in, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, ain't no good talking to her," she said in a friendly manner. "She don't know nothin'. Don't say nothin'. Mother, let go of the man's hand." Her mother beamed at her, and then she repeated, "Mother, let go of the man's hand." My hand was released, and we booked into 2 rooms. We went off with our keys and agreed to meet in half of an hour. My room was basic and battered. There were cigarette burns on every possible surface, including the toilet seat and door inlets. And the walls and the ceiling were covered with big stains that suggested some strange fight to the death involving lots of hot coffee. But it was all heaven to me. I called Katz for the novelty of using a telephone and learned that his room was even worse, but we were both really happy. We showered and put on clean clothes and eagerly repaired to a popular nearby bistro called the Georgia Mountain Restaurant. The parking lot was crowded with pickup trucks, and inside it was busy with meaty people in baseball caps. And I had a feeling that if I said, "Phone call for you, Bubba," everyone in the room would have risen. I wouldn't say the Georgia mountain had food I would travel for, even within Hiawassee. but it was certainly reasonably priced. For $5.50 each, we got meat and three, a trip to the salad bar, and dessert. I ordered chicken fried, black-eyed peas, roasted potatoes, and rutabagas. Ugh. As the menu had it. I had never had them before, and I can't say I ever will again. We ate noisily and with gusto, and ordered many refills of iced tea. Kitty, stop meowing. Dessert was, of course, the highlight. Everyone on the trail dreams of something, usually sweet and gooey. Why are you screaming? My cat's meowing really loud. I'm sorry if you can hear it. It had occupied my thoughts for many days, and when the waitress came to take our order, I asked her, with beseeching eyes and a hand on her forearm, to bring me the largest piece she could slice without losing her job. She brought me a vast, vivacious, canary yellow wedge of lemon pie. It was a monument to food technology, yellow enough to give you a headache, sweet enough to make your eyeballs roll up into your head. Everything, in short, you could want in a pie, so long as taste and quality didn't enter your requirements. I was just plunging into it when Kat broke a long silence by saying with a strange kind of nervousness, "You know what I keep doing? I keep looking up to see if Mary Ann's about to come through the door." I paused, a forkful of shimmering goo halfway into my mouth, and noticed the passing disbelief that his dessert plate was already empty. "You're not going to tell me you miss her, Stephen?" I asked him dryly, and pushed the food home. "No," he responded tartly, not taking this as a joke at all. He took on a frustrated look from trying to find words to express his complex emotions. And then he said, "We did kind of ditch her, you know." He finally blurted out. I considered the charge. "Actually, we didn't kind of ditch her. We totally ditched her." I wasn't with him on all this, and I added, "Who cares?" "Well, I feel bad, just kind of bad, that we let her out in the woods on her own." And then he crossed his arms as if to say, "There, I've said it." I put my fork down and considered his point. And then I made my point. "She came into the woods on her own," I said. "We're not actually responsible for her, you know. I mean, it's not as if we were signed a contract to look after her." Even as I said these things, I realized it was kind of horrible, seeping awareness that he was right. We had ditched her. We left her to the bears and the wolves and the mountain men. I had been so completely preoccupied with my own savage lust for food and a real bed that I had not paused to consider what our abrupt departure would mean for her. A night alone among the whispering trees, swaddled in darkness, listening with involuntary keenness for the telltale crack of a branch or a stick under a heavy foot or paw. It wasn't something I would wish on anyone, and my gaze fell on my pie, and I realized I didn't want it any longer. "Well, maybe she'll have found somebody else to camp with," I suggested lamely, and I pushed the pie away. "Did you see anybody else today?" Katz asked me. He was right. We hadn't seen a soul. "She's probably still walking right now," Kat said with a hint of sudden heat, "wondering where the hell we got to, scared out of her chubby little wits." "Oh, don't," I said, or I half pleaded, and distractingly pushed the pie half an inch further away. He nodded an empathetic, busy, righteous little nod and looked at me with a strange, glowing expression that said, "And if she dies, let it be on your conscience." And he was right. I was the ringleader here, and this was my fault. Then he leaned closer and said in a completely different tone, "If you're not going to eat that pie, can I have it?" In the morning, we breakfasted at the Hardess across the street and paid a taxi to take us back to the trail. We didn't speak about Mary Ellen or much of anything else. Returning to the trail after a night's comfort in a town always left us disinclined to talk. We were greeted with an immediate steep climb and walked slowly, almost gingerly. I always felt terrible on the trail the first day after a break. Cats, on the other hand, always felt terrible. Whenever restorative effects a town visit offered always vanished with astounding swiftness on the trail. Within 2 minutes, it was as if we had never been away. Actually worse, because a normal day we would not be laboring up a steep hill with greasy breakfast food threatening us at every moment to come up for air. We had been walking for about half an hour when another hiker, and a fit-looking middle-aged guy, came along from the other direction. We asked him if he had seen a girl named Mary Ellen in a red jacket with a kind of loud voice. He made an expression of possible recognition and said, "Does she, not to be rude or anything, but does she do this thing a lot?" And he pinched his nose and made a serious and horrible honking sound. We nodded vigorously. She does that all the time. Yeah, I stayed with her and two other guys in Plum Orchard Gap Shelter last night. He gave us a dubious sideways look and said, "Is she a friend of yours?" "Oh no," we said, disavowing her entirely, as a sensible person would. She just sort of latched onto us for a couple of days. He nodded in understanding and grinned. "She's a piece of work, isn't she?" We grinned too. "Was it bad?" I asked him. He made a look that showed genuine pain, and then abruptly, as if putting two and two together, said, So you must be the guy she was talking about." "Really?" Kat said. "What did she say?" "Oh, nothing," he said. But he was suppressing a smile in that way that made you say, What did she say?" Nothing, it was nothing," he said with a big smile. What did she say about us?" He wavered and said, "Oh, all right. She said you guys were a couple of overweight wimps who didn't know the first thing about hiking, and she said she was tired of carrying you." "She said that?" Kat's asked, scandalized. "Actually, I think she called you... Oh, I can't repeat that word. I think she called you to blank." "She called us blank," Kat said. "Now I'm gonna kill her." "Well, I don't suppose you'll have any trouble finding people to hold her down for you," the man said absently, scanning the sky, and nodded. It's supposed to snow, you know." I made a chest-fallen noise. This was the last thing that we wanted. "Snow? Is it gonna be bad? Do you know?" He nodded. He said it's supposed to get 6 to 8 inches. More on higher elevations. He lifted his eyebrows stoically, agreeing with my dismayed expression. Snow wasn't just discouraging, it was dangerous. He let the prospect hang there for a moment and said, "Well, better keep moving." I nodded in understanding, for that was what we did in the hills. I watched him go, and then I turned to Katz, who was shaking his head. "Imagine her saying that after all we did for her," he said, and then he noticed me staring at him, and said in a kind of squirmy way, "What?" And then he said more squirmily, "What?" "Don't you ever spoil a piece of pie for me again, do you understand?" I said to him. He winced and said, "Yeah, all right, geez." And then he trudged on, muttering. 2 days later, we heard that Mary Ellen had dropped out with blisters after trying to do 35 miles in 2 days. Big mistake. All right, everybody. That is the end of chapter 5, and we're moving on to chapter 6 next week. I like this book. I think he's a funny storyteller. I keep being on the verge of like, oh, I really want to do a hike like that. And then being like, why would anyone ever do that? Yeah. Well, I'll see you all next week. All right.